Numbers 13:25 through 33. At the end of 40 days they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are." So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours the inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Here we have the Israelites freed from Egypt and standing on the border of the Promised Land. They send spies into the land in order to find out what they are getting into. The spies come back and confirm the land is all they could ever want it to be. However, they are going to have to fight for it, and the land is inhabited by strong enemies. After hearing this bad report, the next chapter tells us of the Israelites despairing and planning to establish a new leader to take them back to the safety of Egypt. This angers the Lord so much that he wants to destroy them. But Moses intercedes for them, and God withholds that punishment. But these people would never enter into the promise they had received from God, and would instead die in the wilderness. Numbers 14:20 through 23. Then the Lord said, "I have pardoned according to your word. But truly, as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give their fathers. And none of those who despised me shall see it." These are incredible passages, and I think they are a very powerful reminder that just because God has promised you something does not mean you won't have to fight for it. This was the land of promise for the people of Israel, the goal of their exodus from slavery. Yet when they came and stood on the edge of obtaining the promise, they faltered because they were going to have to fight for it. This is what I want to bring to you today. Fight for your promise. I want you to notice a character in this drama, Caleb. Of all the people, he spoke up and said, "Let us fight for our promise." Because he had this attitude, he received the promise where the rest of the people, except Joshua, did not. Numbers 14:24, "But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it." You may be surprised to discover that you can lose the promise which God has given you. It isn't that he changes his mind, and certainly no one is able to move or force anything from him. But he has allowed you a will of your own. He may give you a promise, but that does not mean you must accept it. God gave the Garden of Eden to Adam and Eve for them to enjoy and to live in, and he promised that if they obeyed him in the one command, they would remain there in joy. They, however, chose not to live in his promise. He promised that generation of Israel that he would bring them into the promised land, but they chose not to enter into his promise. He has promised all the world the forgiveness of sins and life eternal with him, yet not everyone will accept this promise. We can fail to obtain the promise which God has given us. This, of course, begs the question, how can we lose our promise? Well, the way the children of Israel lost their promise was fear. They knew God's promise, but when it came time to obtain it, they were too afraid to try. I have heard it said that fear is the opposite of faith, and that very well may be true. For if the children of Israel had trusted God to do what he said he would do, then they would have all had the spirit of Caleb. Fear in our lives will paralyze us from walking in the promise which God has prepared for us. Indeed, fear is a bondage and a slavery which seeks to drag us back into a kind of life less than the children of God ought to live. Romans 8:15 tells us, "For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoptions as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father." Fear is a tool of the enemy to try and stop you from walking in the way which God has for you. Paul had to encourage Timothy in both of his letters to not allow the gift of God to go dormant. Look at 2 Timothy 1:6 and 7. It says, "For this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Timothy evidently struggled with walking in the gifting and promise of God in his life because of fear, and Paul did not want Timothy to miss out on the promise of God. As the Israelites found out, stepping into the promise of God often requires courage and preparation to battle against opposition in many forms. But if we trust God and place our faith in his promise, then we will not be daunted by these things, because we will know that if God promised, then he will bring us through. There's another way in which we can lose the promise of God, and it is subtler and more dangerous than fear: comfort. Matthew 19:16 through 24. "And behold, a man came up to him, saying, 'Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?' And he said to him, 'Why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good. If you would enter life, keep the commandments.' And he said to him, 'Which ones?' And Jesus said, 'You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself.' The young men said to him, 'All of these I have kept. What do I still lack?' And Jesus said to him, 'If you would be perfect, go, sell what you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me.' When the young man heard this, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. And Jesus said to his disciples, 'Truly I say to you, only with difficulty will a rich person enter the kingdom of heaven. Again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven." The Bible has much language concerning the danger of riches. This is not because there is anything inherently sinful or wrong with wealth, but because of our tendency to lean on it for our own comfort. When we become comfortable with where we are, we tend to want to stay where we are. The rich ruler could not attain the promise of eternal life, though it was there before him, and available because he could not relinquish the comfort of his wealth. Many others sought to follow Christ, but found the thing too difficult. Many still do. When I say comfort, I do not only mean the comfort in wealth. Comfort is simply preferring your current position and condition to the uncomfortable prospect of change. When we become comfortable with all kinds of things, even bad and painful things. We become so comfortable with where we are that even moving into something better is daunting. How many times when journeying to the Promised Land did the Israelites say they wanted to go back to Egypt, where they were slaves? In Numbers 14:2-4, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." There was even a group of Israelites who were so comfortable with the land outside the Promised Land, they decided to stay there. Fear may paralyze us, but the bondage of comfort is often much harder to break, for it holds us in the soft chains of our own enjoyment and familiarity. Few are they who choose to leave their comforts and face the hardship of an obedient life, even if the promises are great. Beware the comfortable life. Another way by which we lose the promise of God is by sin. Sin, by its very nature, separates us from God and can, if left unchecked, hinder us from walking in the promises which we have from Him. Recall the first king of Israel, Saul. The Lord was going to establish Saul's throne forever, but because of Saul's disobedience, the Lord had to find someone else. 1 Samuel 13:13-14. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which He commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after His own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over His people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you." Did not the same thing happen to Moses? God had promised Moses to bring him into the Promised Land, but when Moses disobeyed God out of anger and struck the rock instead of speaking to it, he lost the promise. Even the great promise which we hold to for salvation can be lost if we do not govern our lives in righteousness. Matthew 7:21-23. Not everyone who says to me, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name?" And then I will declare to them, "I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness." Do not allow fear, comfort, or sin to separate you from the promises of God. We are meant for great things, and He has great promises for us. 2 Peter 1:3-4. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of Him who has called us to His own glory and excellence, by which He has granted to us His precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. Many times when you are approaching your promise, you will find resistance. It will all of a sudden feel very difficult and uncomfortable. You may find opposition where there was none before. You may find complications where before it seemed simple. You will encounter greater temptations, greater fears, and stronger desires for the way things have been. You will have to fight for your promise. Now, I'm not talking about the promise of salvation here. That fight has been fought and won, but there are many other promises we have as individuals. Perhaps God has called you to a new job or to a new position in your job. Perhaps He has promised you a new living situation. Perhaps He is leading you into ministry. Perhaps you are holding on to the promise for healing or provision or confirmation. Whatever promise you are waiting on, you may have to fight for it. Now that fight may be emotional, it may be physical, it may be relational, and it will certainly be spiritual. It may mean getting rid of some things that are distracting you. It may mean restricting yourself to bring your flesh under control. It may mean breaking off a toxic relationship. It may mean that you have to step out in faith when it does not seem there is anywhere to put your foot. Whatever your fight looks like, if you are assured of God's promise to you, then fight. I want for us to have the spirit of Caleb when it comes to taking hold of the promises of God. Look at Joshua 14, 6 through 13. Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God in Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses the servant of the Lord sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, Surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord my God. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength is now as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. So now, give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out just as the Lord said. Then Joshua blessed him, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, and the son of Jephunneh for an inheritance. Caleb waited 45 years before he got the opportunity to reap the promise of God in his life. But in all that time, he did not give up or let go of the promise. And when he came to the promise and found opposition, he was not deterred. Even though he was 85 years old, he knew that God was faithful, and Caleb went and fought for his promise. You see, the devil is hoping that you will get worn down and tired of waiting. He's hoping that the prospect of having to fight for your promise will make you just give up and let it go. But we need to be filled with a spirit of boldness and hold fast to the promise of God. We need to speak with faith and say, Give me my mountain. I am strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. My weapons are not of the flesh, but are mighty to tear down strongholds and every work of the enemy. I have been given authority and power over Satan's works, and I will fight for my promise, and I will not give up. Here are 3 verses to meditate on to help you towards this end. Galatians 6:9. And let us not grow weary of doing well, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up. Hebrews 10:23. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And 1 Peter 5:8 through 10. Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. If God has promised you, then He will bring you into that promise. If you have to fight for it, then know that the Lord will fight with you and will give you the victory. He is faithful, and your hope will not leave you ashamed. The fight may feel long, but don't give up and don't let go. He will sustain you. Wait upon the Lord, and He will renew your strength, and go forward into the land and take it.